Today we are going to be taking notes on natural selection. Natural selection is a type of evolution. So evolution needs to be defined, and evolution is the change in the allele frequency in a population over time. So let's think about what an allele is. An allele is a version of a gene that's going to result in different traits. And so if we're changing the allele frequency, then we're changing the probability of having those different traits in our population. And it's really important to note that evolution occurs in a population. It doesn't occur in individuals. The whole population will change. And the change doesn't have to be a major change. Simply having a couple more people that have red hair, or a couple more individuals that have sharper claws, that could be a change in the allele frequency, and so that change, we would call that evolution. Now today we're focusing on natural selection. So let's define natural selection. Natural selection is a type of evolution. And it's where organisms that are better adapted to the environment they are going to survive and produce more offspring. And offspring are babies, and those offspring are also better adapted. Another way to look at this is what we call survival of the fittest. But it's not actually fittest as in the strongest or the fastest. Fittest here refers to having babies that are going to survive and be able to have babies of their own. So you might be the fittest if you are the best camouflaged because you're able to avoid a predator. Or you might be more fit because you are actually really slow and able to conserve your energy so that you don't need as much food. If whatever it is that allows you to have more offspring that are going to survive than another member of your population, that organism that is able to survive and reproduce is going to be more fit. So let's look at the requirements for natural selection. So the first requirement is that there is heritable variation. And what this means is that there must be variation in a trait that is passed down from parents to offspring. And this is really important that the trait is actually heritable. And when we say variation, we're talking about the versions of that trait. And those versions are caused by alleles. So let's think of an example. Imagine that I live in a culture where tattoos and piercings make me more attractive. If I'm more attractive, then I am going to be able to have more offspring. I'm going to have more partners. I'm going to be able to produce more offspring. Now, even though I'm able to produce more offspring, my tattoos and piercings, while that's variation in my population, some people have more tattoos or piercings than others, tattoos and piercings are not heritable. No matter what I do, my baby, when it is born, is not going to be born with tattoos or piercings. So even though having tattoos and piercings may make it so that I am more fit, I'm able to have more babies, because that trait is not passed down from me to my offspring, natural selection is not going to be able to occur on that trait. Now, a little side note here is that variations are random. And they are caused by mutations. And those are mutations that occur in the DNA. And so because mutations are random, that means that having different variations, having different alleles come about in your population is also going to be random. So it's not like an organism can choose to evolve. They can't choose to get more fitness. They can't choose to have a trait that is going to make them survive better or be able to have more babies. All right, the next requirement is there has to be a reproductive advantage. So natural selection really boils down to being able to have more offspring. So the way that this works is one of the versions of variation must be able to have more offspring and thus a reproductive advantage over the other version of the trait. Now, more offspring could actually be a healthier offspring or offspring that are able to survive. The whole idea here is that if there's a version of the variation that's able to have more surviving offspring, then those individuals with that trait will have a reproductive advantage. They'll be able to have more surviving offspring that'll be able to then pass on that trait to the next generation. So this is really all about passing on your traits. It's all about heritability. It's all about which trait allows you to have more babies. So let's look at the steps. Our first step is that some individuals in a population are born with helpful traits. And I've put helpful here in quotes because helpful really relates to the organism's environment. A trait that's helpful for survival in one environment might actually be a detriment, and it might be harmful to have that trait in a different environment. So what is helpful, what helps them survive, is related to the environment that they're living in. Our second step is that individuals with the helpful traits are going to be able to survive and reproduce. And it's important with this that they're passing on those helpful traits to their offspring. And this surviving and reproducing is really key, but it's also important to note that they're able to survive and reproduce more than another individual in the population. And that could be because there is some sort of limiting factor. For example, there might be a limited amount of food. So the organisms that are able to get more food are going to be able to be healthier, and they're going to be able to survive and reproduce. But that helpful trait could also make it so that they can avoid predators. And avoiding predators would be able to help them survive and reproduce as well. There's limited opportunities to camouflage, and so having more camouflage makes you better able to survive and reproduce. Or maybe we're talking about a bird, and the way that they attract mates is by singing a really beautiful song. In that case, the limiting factor would be that there are a limited number of mates. So the male bird that can sing the prettiest song will have more opportunities to reproduce. They'll have more opportunities to have offspring. Another thing to note here is that not all of the offspring are going to get that helpful trait. Because of the way that genetics works and that meiosis works, we know that not all siblings look exactly the same. And they don't look exactly the same because they don't all get the same combination of genes. So when we're talking about passing on the helpful trait to their offspring, what we really mean is that there's a higher likelihood of passing on that helpful trait to the offspring. This also goes back to the idea that with evolution, we're talking about the change in allele frequency. It could be that the trait is not passed on, but it's a recessive trait, and so that allele is passed on. And so it still happens to be in the population. And you could, by chance, just by random chance, have more of your offspring getting that recessive allele. That would be evolution. But if it's not showing up in an actual trait, in an actual variation in the population that can be observed and acted on, then natural selection is not going to be able to occur. All right, the very last step here that we are going to take note of is that this happens over time. So over many generations. The population becomes better adapted to their environment. So because we're talking about passing on a trait to offspring, it's not that the individual is going to become better adapted to their environment. It's that over time, the offspring are going to make little tiny changes that over time make them better adapted to their environment. Now, if the environment were to change, then they might not still be the ones that are better adapted, and therefore natural selection could occur again. This is a constantly changing process. But it does follow these simple steps, and it does have specific requirements.